I'm looking for Titina, Titina, my Titina. I've searched from Palestina to London and Beirut. I'll die without Titina, my darling fair Titina. I don't want Rose or Lena, Titina, I want you. Oh, mama, oh, papa.
Welcome back to another episode of the Modern Times Podcast. I'm Nigel Driner, and we have, as always, Anne Munley.
Hi, how are you?
And Sarah Beagleson.
Hello.
And it's been a little while since we've done a show, a full show like this, especially one that is featured on one of Chaplin's feature films. That was no joke intended there. Mm-hmm. We got a lot of great comments on the commentary tracks that we've been doing for some of the Chaplin films. Sarah and Ann, you've both been part of those. How do you like those so far?
I really like them. And I think that, well, that's actually how I ever came to know you, is by your commentary of the Keystones. And I just think that sometimes fans bring information to listeners that maybe they might not, pick up in a book. And a lot of it is our own perspectives. And everybody's got a different perspective, and sometimes people relate to that.
And they're just fun, too, because, like I said, we tackle the movies that really don't have commentary tracks for them yet, anyway.
Right.
Like Carmen and The Floor Walker.
Yeah.
And some of the films that have interesting things to talk about, but as of now, they don't really have any commentary tracks for it. Obviously, the features always do, but...
Right. And what I like about doing the commentaries we've done so far is that it allows me to refresh while I'm watching.
Right.
Because some of those films I haven't seen in a very long time, and it's good to have a reminder like, oh yeah, that part happened, and oh, didn't you know this, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and if we don't have time to do a full episode like we're doing today, we can just hop on and do a commentary track and keep our name out there. Keep the fans at bay so they don't get antsy.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But today we are going to tackle another Chaplin feature. I think the last one that we did was The Gold Rush or The Kid. I mean, that was like last summer.
Yeah, that was a while ago.
Yeah, I mean, I like to space them out because you don't want to run through all the golden Chaplin films and then have nothing left to talk about but like King in New York, you know.
But actually, we've only done two of his features. That's The Kid and The Gold Rush. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Well, and the reason why we're doing Modern Times is because this year is the 80th anniversary of the film, which is hard to believe.
Right. 80 years, yeah.
80 years since the farewell of the Tramp. Now, Anne, we're going to get into the origins of the film and where the ideas were placed into his head to make this film. And obviously, there's been books written on Modern Times. There's a great commentary track by
David Robinson
on the new Criterion DVD, which I listened to last night, and it gives a great technical background. But we don't want to copy his commentary exactly because we want to have our own perspectives on it. But I did write down some things that I thought were super interesting about his commentary. And like I said, this is a film that's been studied from back to front for the last 80 years, but we're going to try to give a fresh perspective from our angle on it. So, Anne, if you want to just start us off with the origins of the film, where did he get the idea to make Modern Times?
I actually think that possibly one of the seeds that was planted in his head is in 1923, he had gone to the premiere of A Woman in Paris in New York, and on his way back to California, he had stopped in Detroit, and he met Henry Ford and his grandson Edsel, and he toured the factory. And I remember reading where he had heard that when we became more industrialized and where people that had worked in farms actually started working in factories, it was a different work ethic. Not so much an ethic, but it was very monotonous. They were doing the same thing over and over and over again. And some of them like snapped. They had nervous breakdowns. I mean, imagine going from being a farmer, having to stand in a factory and just keep doing the same thing over and over again. So that's where I think the seed possibly was planted in his head, and then apparently after City Lights, and he went to London for the premiere, and he, toured around the world, and even before he left for London, the United States was in a deep depression.
Yeah.
So, he realized that the world was changing. People were being forced to work in factories, and then there was no work. So, and also he picked up on a lot of that kind of stuff when he was traveling, his world tour.
That's what I was just gonna mention. His 16-month tour where he went all over the world. That he did after City Lights, which is, when you think about it, it's he makes City Lights, and he has Albert Einstein with him at the premiere, and his great critical achievement in the beginning of the talking era. So it's like, how can you really top that? But in a way, he was like, well, we have to say farewell to the Tramp. We have to make one more film with the Tramp as a final farewell. But at the same time, he wanted to make, and I feel like this is where his political type stuff starts to creep into his movies. They were there a little bit in the older films, but this one definitely has a message. It has a real message in it.
This one, I think it commences his political affiliations that he wants to project onto his films, and it's more concrete in his later films, like definitely with Great Dictator, definitely with Limelight, I'd say, but
even Verdu, because he talks about how he's only killed 7 women when the military and the world governments kill millions a year, and they're hailed as heroes. So.
Right. So and Modern Times is just a silent form he has to work through in order to get any sort of messages he wants out.
And at the time, in this period of the United States in the mid-30s, I mean, a lot of men were just starting to strike. They had had enough, and it was a dangerous thing to strike. And he shows that in Modern Times when the Gamin's father, is killed. And so he was bringing a lot relevant stuff, current things that were going in the country. I mean, the little shack they live in. I mean, there was a lot of these shanty shacks all over the place that people would just together for shelter.
And at the time, it was actually before FDR's presidency, but during the beginnings of the Great Depression, those shanty towns were called Hoovervilles. It's a great political commentary of the state of the country and of the rest of the world, because the economy is just down the...
All right, so we were talking about the origins of Modern Times and where the ideas came from. And when did he start working on the film?
Well, he started working on it technically when he came back from his tour, and he came back in June of 1932. But according to David Robinson, his book, the production started in September of 1933, and it finished January 12th of 1936. But production means everything. It's not just the filming. Now, the actual filming only took about a year, and he started that in 1934 and ended it in 1935. But I guess, the production is the idea and the sketches and building the set and that kind of thing.
Yeah, but, I mean, so it was almost right after he came back from his world tour that he started working on another film.
Right, mm-hmm.
Did he... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
And then, of course, I mean, within 3 or 4 weeks of him coming back, he met Paulette Goddard in July of 1932. So I guess, meeting her, and then, he was inspired to create that character for her.
And that's a real interesting topic too. Is Paulette Goddard? I mean, you could have a whole show about her, which I'm sure we will at some point.
Yeah.
Right.
But she was originally a Ziegfeld girl, and
Yes, she was.
she worked at the Hal Roach studio. She worked with Hal Roach, and Chaplin bought her contract out.
Yep.
Right.
Because he had something in store for her. Now, the thing I really like about Paula Goddard is the fact that ever since, I want to say Mabel Normand, Chaplin, one of Charlie's female co-stars, never really matched the same level as him.
Mm-hmm.
The female in the movie was never his equal since Mabel Normand, and I feel, well, I guess you could argue Edna, but Edna never really had a role like this either.
Yeah.
Right.
And there was Paulette was really equal to the Tramp. The Gamine was really his equal.
Oh yeah. His equivalent. Yeah.
She had Tramp-like, qualities right from the beginning. The first time you see her in this film, and it's a beautiful setup shot of her face and her stealing the bananas and eluding the police, and it's the early Tramp, but there's a female.
Except the one thing is, even though for a lot of time she's by herself, at the beginning she's looking out for her younger sisters and her father. Like, she is very maternal in that sense that the Tramp just never really has. Obviously he wouldn't be maternal, he'd be more father-like, except in the case of the kid. That's like the one instance I can recall that he is that. But otherwise, he is
for himself.
Or
he's trying to survive.
Yes, in a very cruel world as a lonesome fellow.
There's no romance between them in modern times.
Until near the end, when they have the fantasy of living in a home together that they can provide for, and it's all good. All the fantasies one would have in 1930s Great Depression era America, where you just want things to be better because everything's just awful financially, and everyone is trying to survive.
Was City Lights supposed to be the last film that featured the Tramp originally?
No, I don't believe so. I don't think that he thought that. He probably thought possibly it was his last silent film. But then again, you might be right. I mean, if that's his last silent film, and the Tramp lives in the silent world, but I don't know if he ever actually really conceived that concept, like this is it.
Well, the thing was, I mean, he was considering making City Lights a talkie at one point.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure. I think he considered to make Modern Times as a talkie as well.
Yeah.
Up until a certain point, I think it was the scene of them in the the dream home or whatever. I think he originally planned to. That was one of the first things that he shot, and he was originally planning to have dialogue in that scene. But at the last minute, he decided to scrap it and just do it as a silent film.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I mean, in 1936 too. I mean, it's a pretty big deal that somebody was still making a silent film. This was almost 10 years after The Jazz Singer and the talkies ushered in. Doing City Lights in 1931, that was a big deal. But doing another silent film 5 years later was almost career suicide for anybody but Chaplin.
Yep.
Yeah, I can't help thinking part of it was his pure stubbornness. Like, I mean, not stubbornness in a bad way, but, realizing that his art, his pantomime was based in silence. He just held out as long as he could.
Well, and the thing is, too, this film really isn't silent, because there's a lot of things he does using sound effects and all that stuff that you couldn't have done really in the silent era. I mean, I guess you could have, but the scene with, the gas, the flatulation scene.
Yeah, there were some scenes in Modern Times that I'm just like, they went on just a tad too long. And that scene between him and the minister's wife and the feeding machine, the concept was good, but it just kept going on and on. I mean, that's how I saw it, but you're right. I mean, a lot of that wouldn't, the gas scene wouldn't have played out well in the silent era.
Yeah,
real silent era.
I think Modern Times is an example of not traditional silent film, because he's using only machines and technology, except when he does the nonsense song. And I think it just goes to show you that Chaplin's like it's a joke. Like he's making a joke of the whole talkie system. Like I'll do the sound thing, but he turns it into a parody of the larger context because he can get away with it. All silent films have sound in various ways, whether it's through music, whether it's through things like whistling or dogs barking. That's apparent in City Lights, for example. All silent films have some sort of niche to convey sound in ways to express various moods.
Yeah, silent films were never silent, and that's
No.
something I think that they talk about on the Modern Times documentary.
Mm-hmm.
Is that Charlie didn't like the fact that they called them silent pictures because they weren't. They weren't. They had
Right.
music and they had sound effects.
Yeah.
And
They just
I think
didn't
Modern
have
Times is
dialogue,
one of the best examples of using of it's kind of the semblance of the two. It's a silent film made in the talking era, so there is talking in it, but all the talking comes from mechanical devices and through TV screens
until the end,
Right.
until the cafe scene,
right,
where you hear people singing, and then of course
and
the
cheering,
tramp,
yeah.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny. I can't think of the particulars, but I remember reading Dan Kamen's book and talking about how for that scene for the tramp singing, they had to slow the camera down. So this is like the first time you're seeing him kind of like in real time, you know, because silent films were sped up.
Exactly.
Yep.
And yeah, they couldn't do that with the speaking sequence because it would run too fast. But it's something that you don't really notice when you're watching these films. You don't really think about them being sped up at all. It's just something that doesn't even go through your head.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But
mm-hmm.
yeah, when you have the transition, the jazz singer is the same way. And in the silent sequences, everything's run a little faster, and then when Jolson sings, it goes down to real time. So if you're looking for that kind of stuff, you notice it, but if you're not, it's something that just kind of goes by and you don't really even think about.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Mm-hmm.
A couple things about Modern Times that I gathered when I was watching it. Metropolis, the film Metropolis had come out in 1927 by Fritz Lang. And I see a lot of callbacks to Metropolis in Modern Times, kind of the futuristic dystopian world where everybody is part of the machine. To me, that's obvious that he borrowed some elements from that too, because that was such a big film at the time.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like with him getting eaten by the machine and that kind of thing.
One of the scenes I really like is when he comes out of jail for the first time.
Oh
and,
my God!
They tell him to avoid excitement and take it easy. And in about 6 seconds,
in a half minute,
about 6 seconds, they show you the world the tramp's walking into.
Yeah.
And that to me was almost like that to me was kind of a symbol of here's the tramp, from the music hall, this character that was steeped in the music hall and the late 1800s that you've come to appreciate after all these years, and now here he is thrown into the modern world.
Well,
kind
yeah,
of shock type thing.
I think that one of the reasons that the tramp loses his mind in the factory is he's always done his own thing. He's always just went his own way and did things his own way, and now he's got to be automated, and it's just too much for him. Like he just can't handle it. And you're right. It's kind of like the world that he comes out into is just completely different. It's not the Keystones. It's not the 1920s tramp. It's a different world.
Well, it isn't, but you touched on something there I found interesting, because if you watch this film, there are more references and more throwbacks to his entire career up until this point than there was in any other film. You have Chester Conklin in the film, which you haven't seen him in a Chaplin film since the Keystone days.
Yeah.
You have throwbacks to the rink, and you have a throwback to the floor walker with the escalator. It's just
and
like
something I found really interesting. You know how the tramp, right from the beginning, was always trying to elude the cops, or, he was always in fear of being arrested. In this film, I mean, how many times is he arrested or locked away? like 4 different times, and it's just like, oh my God.
Well, he'd rather be in prison. He'd rather be in prison than in the real world. I mean, he even says that. He doesn't want to leave.
Yeah.
Oh, another scene that harkens back to his earlier time is in jail, in modern, with the nose powder, i.e., the dope, where he, just like in Easy Street, when he falls on the heroin needle and then starts kicking ass, he does the same thing here in modern times with the nose powder. He's hopped up, I guess it's cocaine is supposed to be, and then he starts beating people. Well, he was beating up those men that were trying to break out of jail.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a lot of pushing the envelope in this film, and there's the whole scene with the big prison inmate that he's inmates with, and those subtle whatever homosexual jokes that he throws in there that they actually asked him to remove from the film. They thought that apparently that was something that they thought was taking it too far back then, and but he didn't. He kept it in there. Maybe he cut some of the gags out, but he kept a lot of it in there.
There purportedly was a scene, because you're right about one thing. When Modern Times came out, the Hays Code was in full effect. And he was told that he had to change, because originally it was going to be called Dope. That intertitle card says nose powder. Originally it was going to be called Dope, and he had to change it to nose powder. Now, I can't recall where I read it, but purportedly that scene with him in there with the big burly guy doing needlepoint, purportedly there was an earlier scene where he was put in a cell with a cellmate that was, effeminate, and he wanted to get out of that cell. So it's kind of like he comes out of that cell and he goes in the cell with this big burly guy, but the big burly guy's doing needlepoint. So, and there's another scene in the cafeteria or wherever they eat. If you look, as they're getting up and marching back to their cell, there's an inmate, I guess like three up from Charlie, that's very effeminate, and so I think that he was putting things in that maybe they missed, or like you said, pushing the envelope, so to speak.
It was like Hitchcock. Hitchcock would put things in deliberately, knowing the censors would say, hell no, you have to take that out. And he'd say, and he would put that scene in the film knowing full well they'd make him take it out. But then he'd say, okay, well, I'll take that scene out, but if I take that scene out, you have to let me keep this.
Yeah.
So he would add things into his films that he knew were going to get taken out, but he used those as bargaining chips to keep the things that he wanted in there that would have been probably controversial as well.
Yeah,
so Chaplin had the same kind of thing in mind.
Yeah, he had to deal with code era regulations of what could be allowed in movies, because before that it was all like up in the air, like pre 1934, I believe, and then then it was just like very harsh up until the 1960s when the movie industry was changing.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the things too, I mean, at the time a lot of critics, I don't want to say they panned this film, but they said that it wasn't as genius as City Light to the Gold Rush, and it didn't really tackle anything that intense. It was more of a carefree film. But going back and watching it, I mean, he touches on hunger, he touches on poverty, and the riots of the Great Depression, the dehumanization of man. Those are pretty heavy things in a film that's supposedly just a bunch of two-reelers all strung together.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm.
Why don't we get into the making of the film a little bit? So you say he started making it in 1934.
He actually filmed it between 1934 and 1935, but he had conceived it beginnings in 1932, and then the production started in 1933. But the actual filming took place between 1934 and 1935. I think it ended in August of 1935, and then for the rest of the time he was working on the soundtrack, which, I mean, the soundtrack,
brilliant. Yes, amazing.
Oh yeah.
Yes, yes. Of course, he lost. Alfred Newman, he lost him because he walked out on him. But yeah.
And if the soundtrack is legendary for one reason, it features the melody that would end up being "Smile" later on in the 50s. It didn't, when it was in modern times, it didn't have any lyrics.
No.
And I don't think it really had a name.
It did not.
It wasn't until the 50s that Nat King Cole sang it and they put lyrics and stuff to it. But
and even the melody,
that song in and of itself is the best.
Oh yeah, it's a great song. But even in the film Modern Times, the melody is a little different. It's more triumphant in a way. Like it doesn't have the same like sorrowful flow as when it has lyrics in the 50s with Nat King Cole. It's a beautiful theme and melody for the movie, and it's perfect that it gets called "Smile" later on, which is supposedly the final thing the Tramp ever says. So it's a good juxtaposition.
Oh, you know what? I didn't even think about that. You're right.
Yeah.
I never even put those two things together.
Oh yeah. The very last word at the end of the film, he smiled to Paulette Goddard, the Gamine, which in turn becomes the song that Nat King Cole is to sing in the 50s.
Now, I know that Charlie had to have had a lot of anxiety making this film, because here he is in 1934, 1935, making a silent movie. Or Sarah, do you know when he decided he was going to put this singing scene at the end?
No, I don't.
I don't either.
I mean, I wonder, was that always his intention to have the Tramp going out finally singing or finally talking on the screen?
I assume.
Or was this something that he decided maybe towards the end, that if he knew this is going to be the last film with the Tramp, he should go out with his voice somehow in the film?
I assume that Chaplin had an idea that the Tramp would need to speak sooner or later, but that it would have to be something not very unconventional, and to make fun of the whole idea of doing it in the first place, because I don't think he even wanted to. Maybe perhaps that he had some sort of idea when writing the script for Modern Times that something like that would be at the end.
The idea of the Tramp talking would definitely generate excitement for this film.
Oh yeah.
I mean, everybody would want to know what does he sound like.
Yeah.
It says here that they began shooting Modern Times in October of 1934. In December, Charlie Chaplin and Paulette Goddard did sound tests. So when he started in October, probably the idea that there would be dialogue. And it was in December 1934 they did the sound tests, and then I guess he decided that he would just continue with it being a silent film.
Mm-hmm.
I just can't imagine this film with dialogue. I can't. I mean, at the end, but just having the whole film as a talkie, I just can't see that working. I mean, I guess if I had 80 years to get used to it and I didn't know anything different, I would like it, but I don't know. It just seems. I mean, a lot of people criticize The Great Dictator, and they say that the Jewish barber isn't the Tramp and all that because he speaks. And there's even some people that say Modern Times isn't the Tramp because he speaks at the end too.
The thing is, though, Charlie Chaplin himself wanted this to be a goodbye to the Tramp. Now, did he change his mind a few years later? Possibly he did, because there definitely is shades of the Tramp in The Great Dictator.
Oh, definitely.
But I mean, at the time, I guess Charlie Chaplin figured that, the Tramp was saying, you're saying goodbye to the Tramp, and he hadn't conceived the idea of Hitler. I think if he hadn't conceived that idea for The Great Dictator, probably his next film may have been like a Monsieur Verdoux, like where there was no Tramp quality at all in him.
Maybe, yeah.
There's a little Tramp in Monsieur Verdoux too.
A little.
He can't. He could never get rid of that character. It was a part of him. It wasn't.
Yeah, Monsieur Verdoux is like harkening back to like the vulgar Keystone days in a way, with like much more not so good intentions.
Now let's talk about the music for a second in this film. Now we touched upon it earlier, but when you're listening to this soundtrack, it's got a lot of modern. Here we go with another joke like that. Modern music for the time. There's a little Gershwin type music thrown in there, but there's also callbacks to a song from the 20s called the Prisoner Song, which was a big hit in the mid 1920s. They play that little interlude musical piece when he's in jail, and the song, the Nonsense song he sings at the end, was a song that was released in the United States in 1925. It was called Tatina, and that actually has lyrics, and it's the same song. So a lot of people think that Chaplin wrote that song for the movie,
right.
but it was an existing song that he took and put his own lyrics over. So Charlie was staying rooted in the silent era, but at the same time, he wasn't ignoring the rise of, George Gershwin and the kind of music that was becoming popular in the 20s and 30s. So it's kind of a hybrid between the two eras.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a phenomenal soundtrack. The way that the music flows in it, like the first time you hear strains of What Will Be Smile is when the Tramp and the Gamine first go in front of those houses and sit and get to know each other.
Yeah.
That's the first time that you hear the strains of that. It's got a beautiful melody. I love that song.
The whole soundtrack, honestly, you can listen to as just a soundtrack without the film, and you can see the movie playing in your head. That's how strong the soundtrack is to this film. You can see the scenes in your head. If you've seen the film enough times, you can just listen to the music and you can see the movie playing in your head. I mean, that's a testament to how strong the music is.
To me, watching Modern Times, you can definitely see that the Tramp has aged. I mean, he's only 46. That's not old, but he looks different than, the earlier Tramp.
Yeah.
You could see that he's not as youthful.
Yeah.
Possibly life has beaten him down. Well,
well, a few marriages and divorces, and a couple kids will do that to you.
Yeah.
Well, and now that you mention it, there's a scene, the scene in the department store when the woman pulls the clothes out of the basket,
yes.
and Charlie comes out. You can see a huge gray spot in his hair where he missed coloring it in. So, I mean, there's even scenes in the circus where he's got gray hair. I can't imagine how he missed that at the time.
The circus is terrible with his hair. Ugh, he did not know how to dye at all.
And there's a story that Paulette Goddard, when she came to the set, was looking all coiffed and her hair was all, just beautiful. I mean, she was a stunning looking woman. And Charlie Chaplin gave her that hairdo that she wears for most of the film. With the and the smudge face that she has. It's only at the end of the film where she starts to look a little bit more glamorous.
Yeah.
And she's also has no shoes through the most of the film.
But you have to give it to Paulette Goddard. I mean, when you look at Chaplin's other films, really the only other co-star in his films that he kind of gave equal billing was Jackie Coogan. I mean, him and Jackie Coogan and the kid are yin and yang. They're equally the star of that film.
Mm-hmm. Well, just like A Dog's Life.
Yeah, true. I mean, but I would say that Paulette is an equal star of this film, and that says a lot when it comes to Charlie Chaplin, because usually he made sure that you knew he was the number one guy in the film, and like there was nobody that could even come close to rivaling his performance. But Paulette, I mean, she comes close. She definitely does. Her scenes are not throwaway scenes. They're just as good as the scenes with the Tramp.
She's very charming. That's what I like most about her.
According to his son Charlie Jr., and I just finished reading his book again. I mean, it was not always a happy time for her because, she wasn't used to his directorial, the way that he directed. And many times, she would just come home crying and just, completely exhausted because he was such a perfectionist that, it would affect her like that.
Though, I mean, you think this is Paulette's first time ever working in a silent picture too. She was going back in time a little bit with this. Well, I mean, maybe she was in a silent film, you know, in her real early days. I'm not sure, but
I don't believe she was. I think she was always in talking, and I don't know if she was in that many, but I don't believe she was ever in a silent film. And like you said,
I'm sure that took a lot of adjusting for somebody that had never worked in the silent era to have to act that way. I mean, you can't say enough good things about Paulette Goddard in this film. Now, at this time, they weren't married, or were they? Officially.
Well, sort of married.
Well, were they ever officially?
No, that happened after Modern Times premiered, and then they went off. I think her and her mother went along with him. She thought she was going to Hawaii, but he decided, let's go to Asia. So they were gone for like 3 or 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
And it was there supposedly in China that they were married. So no, during this time, they weren't married. But if you look at articles from this time period, they had her pinned to him immediately, like that, his fiance. So right off the bat, they kept people wondering, were they or weren't they going to marry? Were they or weren't they married? And it wasn't until, I believe, at the premiere of The Great Dictator in 1940 that he referred to her as his wife. So it's so strange. It's kind of like they kept the press guessing.
Which kept him in the headlines. There had to be a lot of speculation when Charlie was making this film in Hollywood as to what exactly he was going to do, because, I mean, he had already pushed the envelope in 1931 with City Lights. Now here he is in 1936 putting out a silent movie. You know, that in and of itself had to be a curiosity for a lot of people to go see how this was going to work in, you know, the golden studio age, because by 1936 all the major studios were cranking out their you know, lavish films, and they were all working on overdrive. And here comes, you know, the dinosaur, let's just say, at that time,
right? Mm-hmm.
Coming out with a silent picture, you know. So that in and of itself is a testament to his star power at the time, that only he could do that. Only he could. Because Buster Keaton, that wouldn't have worked. Harold Lloyd, it wouldn't have worked at that time. They were really starting to fall on difficult times during this time.
I kind of equate it to, if a film is coming out on DVD or Netflix or whatever, and they decide, no, we're not going to put it out on any of these. We're going to put it out on a VHS. I mean, people would be like, what? I don't even know if I have a VHS machine. You know, so yeah, it was kind of like, you know, a silent film in 1936, but only he could do it or draw the interest for people to go and see it. As far as Paulette Goddard, what I'm reading in IMDb is that her first film was Bertha Marks, 1929, with Laurel and Hardy. Now, it says it's her film debut, and they actually had 2 versions of this film. They had a silent and they had a talkie, and the silent was for, I guess, cinemas that were not equipped to show talkies yet, and that was in 1929. So,
interesting. Yeah, around that time, a lot of studios were making silent versions of talking pictures to show in theaters that were not yet equipped for sound.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm watching this scene right now in Modern Times where he's a shipbuilder, and of course the ship goes off, you know. But he uses a back projection to show the ship, and he also does that in the scene where him and the Gamine are in the paddy wagon and it crashes, and you can, I mean, it's so cheesy with these back projection things, and it's just, they're so obvious. I guess they did it in a lot of films, but for some reason, to me, it's just so much more obvious. You see that back projection.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I would say the ship projection looks better than the paddy wagon going over.
Yeah, because
that one was like they didn't cut it quick enough. If they cut it about a second earlier, I don't think it would have looked as bad. But they left it. They left that scene linger too long.
Right, and then you're like, right,
it doesn't look right. A couple other things. The house that they, their shantytown house that they live in towards the end of the movie, it looks a lot like the house from the Gold Rush.
You mean the cabin?
The cabin, yeah, that's what I meant. The cabin from the Gold Rush.
I thought it was a little bit more jacked up than the one in the Gold Rush.
I think it was a little bit smaller too, but it was very reminiscent for sure.
I like the way he conveys to the audience, which they're not in the cabin together at night. Like, he's in the little shed, and she's sleeping in in the cabin or the shanty. And he does a similar thing in The Vagabond, where he wakes up outside, laying on a cactus or whatever, and to convey the idea that he's not in that wagon with Edna.
Yeah, there's nothing suggestive going on. He makes sure to show that.
Right, and especially I think it was more important in modern times because there was such strict codes, moral codes in film, so he definitely needed to project the fact that he wasn't in the cabin with her.
A couple of things about the opening of the film. Something I learned on the commentary for the Gold Rush is that the clock you see at the beginning of Modern Times during the credits scene, that clock is actually in the background of a scene at the end of the Gold Rush where after Big Jim and Charlie, are millionaires and they're in that house together and Big Jim's getting his nails done and all this stuff.
Right.
There's a clock in the background, and that clock is the same clock that Charlie uses for the opening shots of Modern Times, which I thought, I mean, to connect the Gold Rush and Modern Times with the same prop, I thought that was...
Oh, wow, yeah.
And the fact that he held on to the same clock for that long.
Oh, yeah. The opening of Modern Times, when these men are coming out of the subway, okay, like a herd, which...
Oh, the sheep.
Yeah, and there's one black sheep right in the middle.
And we can only guess who that is.
Well, I don't know, but it's just interesting. These men come out and,
I mean, the first shot of Modern Times is a symbolism, artistic, symbolistic shot. A lot of people were criticized this film, saying that it wasn't as deep as his other movies, and it was just a bunch of two-reelers, Charlie in the factory and Charlie in the department store, and all this kind of stuff. But, I mean, for a film that, quote-unquote, isn't that deep, it's got a lot of symbolism in it.
Well, one of the people to actually refer to this as a string of two-reelers was Woody Allen in the documentary Life in Art from 2003.
Right.
That's what he refers to it as, just, a string of two-reelers.
Well, you know what I will say about this film is that if you're not familiar with Chaplin at all, this is a great movie to introduce his character to somebody that may not be familiar with him. It's got a little bit of everything in it. It's not too sappy, like, and I'm not saying sappy in a bad way, like City Lights or The Circus. It's got a more modern approach to the filmmaking. It's got Chaplin in a lot of different situations, which is where the two-reeler thing comes in. But this was my first Chaplin feature, and I rented it. I had seen a couple of the Keystone films, and that got me interested. And I went and I rented Modern Times because let's face it. I mean, when people think of Chaplin, there's those iconic shots of Chaplin, and many of them come from this film. Him walking down the road with Paulette.
Oh, that's definitely. Mm-hmm.
Him on the wheel. Him stuck on the wheel with the wrenches. All these iconic cinema shots. Most of them they use from this film when they talk about Chaplin.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have the roll dance from the Gold Rush and the tightrope scene from City Lights with the monkeys, and yeah, you have him on the machine in Modern Times, and of course the end of the film is really one of the most iconic. And it's interesting because he's not really going off into the sunset; he's going into the sunrise, which is unique because it's dawn.
A better day is coming, yeah.
Right.
And it's a twist on the ending that you're so used to with Chaplin. I mean, ever since 1915, at the end of The Tramp, he walks off, alone at the end, and there's that,
right.
And there's the end of The Circus. So it's like finally, the Tramp has to go. The farewell to the Tramp. He's not walking alone anymore. He's got a partner in crime, and they're kind of going off. They're kind of going off into an uncertain world, but at the same time, it's more certain than Charlie has ever been before. At least he has somebody to work off of and be with when he's going off onto his next adventure.
And I mean, that I would love to go to where that was filmed. Just to be in the. I mean, apparently it hasn't changed much. I think it's on Sierra Highway and Penman Road in San Clarita. And that's another interesting thing about Modern Times. There was a lot of outside the studio filming. There's like the department store was shot in Hollywood Boulevard and Vine Street. He shot Los Angeles Harbor for the harbor scenes. It says here San Pedro Harbor and the Los Angeles Harbor, but I imagine they're the same place. No, the San Pedro Harbor is in Long Beach, and the Los Angeles Harbor is in San Pedro.
So he did a lot more here than he did, because most of his other films, he just kept everything pretty much inside his studio.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and he shot, in different locations here. Like he didn't just keep it into Chaplin's studio.
Let's talk about for a second the original ending to Modern Times and the idea that Charlie had to have the gamine turn into a nun at the end of the film.
That supposedly was the original ending. He comes out of jail or a mental hospital, and he comes out and he sees her, discovers that she's a nun, and that, he is going to be by himself again. And some of those pictures, photos from that, I mean, he looks very dejected. And the image of him, he's walking down a different road than here, than the one that we know, and he really looks dejected. Now, I'm not sure why he changed it to this iconic scene, which was the right choice. But it is interesting. There's no footage of that, but we have the photographs.
Well, the thing is too, I mean, that would have been a good ending, but it would have been more of a City Lights type ending, and I think he knew he had done that already. And if this was going to be his last film as the Tramp, he had to send the Tramp off in more happy spirits than the last film.
Right. City Lights was ambiguous because it's kind of like he might get her, but if he had done the original, he's not getting her. She's a nun. Mm-hmm. So, and it would have been just much more. It would have been sadder to see him go off like that. A goodbye to the Tramp, and it's just sad.
Yeah.
When this is uplifting.
And I read that he had a hard time coming up with an ending that was as strong as the City Lights ending. He was trying really hard to come. He's like, oh, how can you top that? How can you top that ending of the film, the last film I did? So I think when it comes to both those endings and comparing them, they're different, but I think they both achieve the same. I think they achieve what they're trying to achieve. Because the end of Modern Times is trying to achieve something different than the end of City Lights. And they're both kind of ambiguous, because even at the end of Modern Times, they're walking down the uncertain road. They don't even know where they're heading off to.
All they know is that it's promising.
The end, Paulette's face is completely devoid of happiness, and that's when he tells her to smile, which is a great send off for that character from 1914 all the way up to 1936. If that's the last thing he's gonna tell an audience,
the thing is right. And if you look at that scene, it's like she's crying, she's upset. They've been fired. The cops are looking for her, or the welfare authorities. and she's all desolate, and then he's like just whistling, tying his shoe, and it was such a contrast between them. And then he tells her to buck up and never say die, and you know and
Well, the thing is, he's used to it. That's what he's done all his life. He's used to that uncertain road, and that's why the shot that I like a lot is when he stops and looks at her, and he has almost like this look of like confusion that she's looking upset. It's like
right.
Why? It's like he's confused why she would be upset, but then he realizes, oh yeah, she hasn't been doing this as long as I have been. So then he kind of gives her his advice of just smile and head down the road type thing. And that's how I see it anyway. Because at first he looks really serious when he looks at her and notices that she's unhappy. He has this real like distressed look on his face, and then it's like it kind of hits him that, oh yeah, I'm used to this. She's not.
I think she's realizing what has happened to her life, and I mean, really the same thing as in the kid. I mean, they're trying, welfare authorities are after her, just like in the kid. I mean, it's a slightly different dynamic, but I think she looks sad through a lot of the film, and it's almost like she doesn't expect kindness. And when he gives her some kindness, it's like when she's sitting in the paddy wagon, and he says, "Oh, remember me from the bread?" And she shakes her head a little, and then she just starts crying.
Speaking of that scene, the part where he's trying to get himself arrested again, that's classic. That's classic Tramp, because in his mind he's thinking, all right, well, I can't get arrested to save my life. So if I'm gonna get arrested, I might as well get a meal out of it. I might as well go do something that's gonna help me out. If I'm gonna get arrested anyway. So that's when he goes into that restaurant and orders all that food.
Gives out candy and cigars, and
he taps on the glass and gets the officer to come in when he's telling the girl that he can't pay. He's setting the whole thing up himself.
And it's funny because there's a scene in the cabin where she's preparing a meal, and she's got this big ham, and he's looking at her and trying to figure out where did she get the ham, and she winks at him, and he looks at her like, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. And I'm thinking, weren't you just stealing meals? Just like he's chastising her because she stole the ham. And I'm like, that's a little hypocritical.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's that, do as I say, not as I do type mentality.
Yeah, I think he's also trying to look out for, like, what I do, I need to do, but you have such a better opportunity than I do. Yeah.
Did you ever notice that the chef with the bread that gets stolen looks a lot like Fatty Arbuckle? He's a larger guy. He always reminded me of Fatty Arbuckle there. And that leads into the discussion about Chester Conklin. I mean, he hadn't been in a film with Chaplin since the Keystone days.
Yeah.
And, Charlie brings him back for modern times. I'm shocked that, if Mabel Normand had been alive or Arbuckle, you wonder if he would have found a way to get them into this film.
And he used Hank Mann again in this scene, in the burglar scene. He was one of the burglars.
Oh, that's right.
And he played the boxer, and then he would go on to play one of the stormtroopers in The Great Dictator.
Yeah, of course, Henry Bergman plays the restaurant owner at the end. So there's a lot of final farewells in this film, most certainly. But it's good to see Charlie and Chester Conklin work together for one last time.
Yeah.
Because that's definitely a throwback.
No, Chester Conklin was in The Great Dictator.
Oh, that's right.
He was the guy that got the shave.
Yeah, it's interesting though that to me that he brought him back though after all those years. Wondered if maybe if he had fallen on hard, because how he kind of brought Buster Keaton in to limelight after. Keaton needed work. I wonder if Chester Conklin was in need of work, so Charlie brought him in as well. It just seems strange to me that he brought him back after all that time of not working with him.
Yeah, it's 22 years. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you know what it is, too, is that Chester Conklin was in the very first Chaplin film.
Making a Living, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Like the cop, right? That chases when the car is going down the
the
hill.
Yeah.
That always makes me feel good, though. I mean, because of course, when I first saw Modern Times, I didn't know who that was. But looking back on it now, it's like, that's really cool that he brought back somebody from the very beginning.
Yeah.
To work with him in his final film as the Tramp.
It just shows how loyal he was to his former cast members.
Now, when this film was released, when it was all said and done, from what I heard in the commentary track, it did okay, but it didn't do as well as everyone had hoped.
Well, I mean, there was headlines saying like 50,000 people, because I've seen like headlines in the New Yorker. It said Chaplin film comes out, 50,000 people, clamor to see it. It had its premiere. It had its Hollywood premiere at the Grauman's Chinese Theater.
Mm-hmm.
And he had the circus there as well. But it wasn't the flashy event that the circus was. When the circus premiered, Sid Grauman put on a circus. This was a lot more low key. But it had a lot of Hollywood people came to the premiere of Modern Times. But no, it didn't do what City Lights did and that kind of thing. It wasn't as successful. It was almost like probably a curiosity for people to go see it.
Not even 10 years had gone by since the silent era pretty much had died, but that was an eternity in the Hollywood system at that time. Because you think of all the films that had come out from 1928 to 1936, that was the golden era of Hollywood. And, here comes this silent film with Chaplin again. It was a real risk. And like you said, a curiosity. People would have went just to see what this was all about.
It wasn't the success that City Lights was.
Yeah.
The New York Journal on Thursday, February 6, 1936, their headline says 50,000 battle to see Chaplin film opening. Now this was in New York. A lot of people went to see it. It says here Chaplin film opening, riot ties up Broadway.
Well, I'm sure on its initial release it was big, but from what I had looked at, it didn't do the numbers that the previous Chaplin films had done. And obviously you can't expect it to, because it was a different time. It was a different time. How much controversy was there at this time about the elements that are touched on this film? I mean, sure, Charlie throwing the brick at the police officer and the riots and all that stuff. I'm sure that didn't go by unnoticed by a lot of the critics.
You know what? I think part of it may have been is that, you can only stay on top for so long before you start having people, like haters, so to speak, the critics and stuff.
People that are part of the new studio system of the 30s and 40s, they're looking at this as just Charlie Chaplin from 20 years ago. Here we go. Here we go again with another Chaplin movie that's past its prime.
Mm-hmm.
I've always thought it was so abysmal. It still is today. How Hollywood doesn't acknowledge the people that came before the 30s. And you're right. It's kind of looked down on them, so to speak. And there probably were a lot of people that were like, who the hell does he think he is to try and make a silent film in 1936?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Even though technically when when talking film came out, a lot of the artistry of films was kind of halted.
Yeah.
Because of this new technology.
Oh, yeah.
And it wasn't really until 1939 where they started coming out with these big sweeping epics and, Technicolor and stuff like that. So, it took about the artistry of films.
Yeah, it took about a decade for Hollywood to know what it was doing again, because it was a big transition from silent to sound.
When the film came out, was it publicized that Charlie was going to speak in it? Or was that a surprise that they just threw in at the end that everybody was shocked to see at the end of the film?
No.
Because it kind of builds. It kind of builds when they get the job at the restaurant. He's asking if he can sing, and he's looking at her like, no, I can't. But she says, yeah, you can. So from there, it's when the whole thing kind of builds to this moment where he has to speak in order to survive the situation. I mean, that's a really clever way to do it. But yeah, and was that publicized that Charlie was going to speak in this film?
I believe it was. That may have been a way to get people to build excitement for it. Now, I know I've seen it on posters, but I don't know if it's posters from reissues. Although I don't know why you would have to put for a reissue Chaplin Speaks, but
well, I know the Great Dictator had that on the posters. Chaplin Speaks. I recall seeing that on a couple of the promotional advertisements for Great Dictator. That was one of the selling points of that film.
Yeah, you know what? You might be right. I don't know if maybe that's where I'm getting confused, because I know I've seen it on posters. Maybe it was for The Great Dictator and not for Modern Times.
I'm just imagining, though, not knowing going into this that he's going to sing a song at the end and just being surprised by it. I mean, I can only imagine how that must have been in 1936.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and let's talk about the Nonsense song for a second. Obviously, it was based on that song Titina from the 20s, but he sings a song, but it's in no particular language. It's in a gibberish language that makes no sense in any language, which means it's universal.
Yep.
Which means it's still true to what the Tramp is. He's not defined by any particular culture or language. Even though he's now talking, it's in a language that's foreign to everybody.
Right.
Yeah, so still keeping to the integrity of the Tramp being a universal character.
And that's something that obviously when I originally saw Modern Times, I didn't understand. I thought I didn't really know what he was singing. I understood some words he was saying, but it's not really something that I thought about. But then when you go back and read why he did it that way, it's like, oh, okay. That's, as a person whose first Chaplin feature was Modern Times, a lot of people say, the Tramp never spoke, and, if Chaplin speaks in a film, he's not the Tramp. I never had that issue because the first film I saw of the Tramp pretty much had him singing and talking at the end. So that was never an issue for me. But I know a lot of silent film sticklers feel that if Charlie talks in the film, it's not the Tramp. So that's an interesting argument that can go on for eternity.
And there's a lot of people that consider his last truly silent film to be The Circus.
Oh, because City Lights has the talking in it too.
Well, City Lights has music and
like the dog,
sound effects.
Yeah.
And Henry Bergman talks at the beginning. I think that's Chaplin's voice speaking. It's that, jumbled, and then that woman gets up there and talks,
right.
The statue. That was all Charlie, right? Doing all those voices.
And that was his way of mocking, because the early talking films sounded terrible. Mm-hmm. I mean, and that was his way of kind of, making fun of the early talking films and the sound quality
terrible sound
they
quality.
had.
Yeah, terrible.
Regarding the Nonsense song, when the film was released in 1936, it had 3 verses, I think. And then when Charlie re-released the film in the 50s, he cut a verse out of the end of the film.
I think it had 4 verses.
4 verses,
originally.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. There are a couple, stories out in the air there about why he cut that out. On the David Robinson commentary, David Robinson seems to think it was just cut because maybe in the 50s Charlie thought the song had gone on too long. Charlie had an anxiety about people of the current generation thinking his films were too old-fashioned and not funny. So he had a knack for going back in and trimming down some of the scenes that he thought wouldn't work anymore. And that's one of the parts that got the cut, was the end of the Nonsense song. But Anne, you have another version of why that could be.
Most people have seen the Nonsense song where she gets the ring after doing whatever and she just takes off. There's a 4th verse and it shows her going to a pawn shop with the ring. And guess what? It's a fake ring. So, and so that part actually adds the humor to the entire song because she got taken.
Mm-hmm.
so to speak. And the pawnbroker is what would be considered now stereotypical Jewish kind of. It's like a caricature of what a lot of people thought of Jewish people, miserly and that kind of thing. So I can't recall where I read it, but it has been suggested that maybe possibly one of the reasons that he removed that scene for the reissue of 1954 was that it had only been 9 years since the end of World War II, the Holocaust, the horror of that, and possibly he removed it.
Sensitivity.
Right. But what I find interesting, though, Nigel, is you said that until you got the M2K version, that you had always seen the completed version of the nonsense song. So, I wonder.
When I rented it on VHS as part of that Chaplin Centennial Collection, that had the full song in it. And then when I got the David Shepard DVD, which I think I also rented from the library, that had the full song in it. So it wasn't even something that I thought had ever been edited out until I got the MK2 version. And I'm watching it, and there's just this horrible jump cut in the middle of the song, and it cuts to him running back into the other room, and it's like, number one, that was a terrible, terrible edit. And number two, especially when you're used to the original version for so long, and number two, why on earth would you cut out any of that song? That's the big moment, in modern times when Charlie gets to sing and gets to speak. Yeah. Why would you cut out any of that? But I understand now why they did it. But I'm also very happy that I have the uncut version on DVD.
Yeah.
I had only ever seen the regular, the one on Turner Classic and then the M2K. But I did notice, I'm like, okay, tra-la-la-la, and the next thing you know, he's in the dressing room. So there's like this cut. And then I, read that there had been a fourth verse, and then I had actually seen a clip of it, of the whole thing. And, I was like, oh my God, he was constantly cutting his films,
he had like George Lucas syndrome.
Yeah,
that's what I like to call it. George Lucas can never leave Star Wars alone. He's gone back to those original films.
I was literally just about to say that. Yeah.
2 or 3 times since the 70s, and added things and cut things out and redone sound effects and added things and things that weren't needed, things that didn't need to be cut or didn't need to be added. I can only imagine. I think, Anne, you're the one that said that. If Charlie was still around today, God knows what his films would look like. They could have CGI in them.
I know. It's just like every film he apparently owned from 1918. I don't know what the original Sunnyside looked like, but I know there was parts of Payday were taken out, and Shoulder Arms, and the Gold Rush, and the Kid, and I don't know.
As a creative person, he probably was never satisfied.
Nope.
That's probably the same thing that George Lucas has issues with. All they do when they see the movies is see the things that they don't like, see the things that they think they should have fixed.
Yeah.
Well, when an audience sees the film, they don't think of it that way. They just see it for what it is. But when you go back in as an audience and watch a film that you're used to seeing, and it's got things either edited out or changed or things added to it, as an audience, it's just like, okay, well, this isn't what I remember. I want to see the movie that I remember.
Right.
But I can see both sides of the coin there. But in this day and age of DVD and Blu-ray, though, it'd be nice to have both versions available.
Yes.
Let's see. I think we've covered pretty much everything here. To wrap this up, at the end of the day, this is the final film with the Tramp. It's a fond farewell to a character who had been around since 1914. Truly the most famous character in cinema. Even to this day, he's still up there. He's been gone for 40, 50 years. His last film was in 1936, but you can show a picture of Charlie Chaplin to anybody in the world, most people in the world, and they'll know who it is. Even if they don't know who it is, they have seen a picture of him before.
Like, they can recognize the character even though they've never seen the movies.
Exactly. And, after this, Charlie will go on to do The Great Dictator, which was a completely different thing for him, but it was something that he thought he needed to do. And in a way, he brought the Tramp back yet again. I mean, that's debatable, depending on
and Paulette Goddard.
Yes, Paulette Goddard came back again. As far as the Tramp goes, this was the end, and I can't imagine a better send off than what he gave us. To be honest.
Oh yeah, with you. Yeah. I mean, it's one of the most beautiful images in film, and if you show that image, most people know who that person is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's so like iconic, and then it was the end. They consider it the official end of the silent era. Like Charlie Chaplin was closing out the silent era. I mean, I know in the 70s, Mel Brooks had done silent films, but that was in the 70s.
Kind of like The Artist. The Art,
right,
which it's kind of like a nostalgic. It's kind of like an art piece. Even in 1936, I mean, this is probably considered kind of an avant-garde type picture, because it's not what was going on in 1936. This is a long dead tradition, a long dead industry, an antique kind of film that was coming out.
Do you know that Gameen's real name in this film?
No.
I don't think so. No.
Just like the Tramp.
Her name is Ellen Peterson.
Oh.
Really?
Now, you can't see it in the movie because I was just looking at them filling out the vagrancy report.
Oh, yeah, right.
But if you look, there's pictures of it, like still photos of this. And her name is Ellen Peterson. It says complexion olive. It's interesting. But, yeah, that's her real name. It's never referred to in here, and you can't see it in the actual film because it cuts away as he was filling it out. The vagrancy report.
Interesting. Wow, but you learn something new every day.
If you look at a still photo of that vagrancy report, it says Ellen Peterson on it.
Well, that's something I'll put in my memory banks. That's a good thing to know. Definitely. No, I mean, I never even thought about that before. That's something that never even crossed my mind. Because, Charlie's name is the Tramp. Nobody really has real names in these films.
Right. Mm-hmm.
They all go by kind of these pseudonyms. But
right.
Or we'll vaguely say like Johnny, and that's about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. So, great film. For me, a lot of rewatchability. This is the film I show to people who aren't necessarily familiar with Chaplin because it's got a lot going on in it, and it's, like I said, it's more modern in a sense in a lot of his films from the 20s. Right. It's a lot more palatable for somebody in 2016 to appreciate, I feel, than some of his older works.
Mm-hmm.
But, it has its flaws, it has its issues, but overall, it's a great film, and it's one of my favorites.
Well, yeah, and it's the film that really, I guess, got you interested in Charlie Chaplin. So that, always has special significance.
Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah, and I'll always look at it that way, too. I'll always look at that how I saw it the first time.
Right.
So I'll always have that connection with this movie. And Sarah, go over again real quick. What were your first Chaplin features?
I think I remember. I was...
Kid.
Mine kind of... I only saw clips of my first feature when I was in 8th grade in my history class. My history teacher showed us clips from The Great Dictator with the bomb that doesn't go off, so he has to go check it. And that's what got me hooked, I'd say. I can't remember what the first feature watched in entirety, though.
But whenever you look at those films again, you can't help but go back and think about the first time that you saw them and the impact that they had on you,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is the one that does it for me. So, all right, we'll wrap this episode up. All right, well, we're going to play now some audio clips from some of the fans of the show who have their own thoughts on modern times and how that film affected them. So we'll go ahead and play those now.
My name is Charles Epting, and I'm the editor of Silent Film Quarterly magazine. Modern Times is my favorite of Chaplin's films. It's whenever somebody asks me where to start with Charlie Chaplin's career, that's the first place I go. I think that it's not only the culmination of his silent film career, but arguably the culmination of silent film in general as an art form. Everything that he had been working on for 2 decades, I think, reached its pinnacle. I think that he had fine-tuned his performance and his storytelling and his composition and everything that he had worked so hard for and strived towards, I think came to a head in modern times, and I think that it is his masterpiece. Growing up in Los Angeles, I've been fortunate enough to visit a number of Charlie Chaplin filming locations over the years, and obviously a lot of his movies were shot on location, in Los Angeles and the surrounding areas. Modern times, there's a couple of great locations that I've been fortunate enough to visit. There's a scene where he and Paulette are running away from the cops that was filmed in Westwood, just down the street from UCLA. The scene where he and Paulette are sitting in the front lawn of a home dreaming about what their future could be like, that's an actual home in Studio City that still survives today in a much altered form, but it's still the same house. But I think obviously the most important location in the film, and perhaps the most important location in silent film history, is the final sequence where he and Paulette walk off into the distance, smile playing in the background, hope of better life, and hope that they'll have better luck than they have had over the course of the film. The first time I visited that site, I was at a Charlie Chaplin screening at William S. Hart Park in Newhall, and I had some friends who were running the event who were very plugged into the silent film community in Los Angeles. And the special guest that day was Tippi Hedren, the actress most famous for her appearance in Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. And somehow over the course of the afternoon there were Chaplin screenings and props on display, and somebody had the crazy idea to go visit the site from the end of modern times. And Tippi Hedren, who obviously is from a much different era of cinematic history than Charlie, but an appreciator of his nonetheless, got roped into this plan, and we all piled into a couple of cars and drove off into the distance, miles and miles away from anything really. And this is before there was a plaque placed at the site, so it took us a while to line up. We were all on our phones trying to call up the final scene to line up the hills and try and find the exact spot where Charlie and Paulette walk off together. And we finally found it. We pulled off on the side of the road. Here's Tippi Hedren, one of the most famous actresses from the middle of the last century. And it was just so surreal for me. It really was when I started cutting my teeth on Chaplin's career and on silent film, and it was just a very formative event for me to be standing at one of the most famous filming locations in history with one of the most famous actresses in history, with good friends of mine who are equally crazy and passionate about this stuff as I am. And it was just really special for me, and every time I watch that movie and that final scene in particular, it brings me back to that just bizarre, anachronistic turn of events that placed me at the exact location with Tippi Hedren. So that's my personal connection to modern times. I think that has a lot to do with why it's my favorite film of Chaplin's and one of my favorite films ever made by anyone.
Hi there, modern timers. My name is Chris Roberts. I'm in Inverness, which is near Loch Ness in the Highlands of Scotland. And Charlie Chaplin had a connection with this area. He and Una and their children used to take regular holidays in the Highlands, and they stayed in a place called Nairn, which is a coastal town in an area called the Moray Firth, about 15 miles from where I'm speaking just now. And around the same time, this is the late 1960s, early 1970s, my family used to take our summer holidays in Nairn as well, and I can remember as a small child my parents walking me past the Newton Hotel on the seafront and telling me that this is where Charlie Chaplin came on his holidays, and I was quite thrilled. Even at a young age I knew who Chaplin was. We used to watch short silent films, silent comedies on television, usually terrible quality prints with an awful tinkly piano soundtrack. But the humour, the wit, the invention still shone through, and as a child I remember loving silent comedies in the same way that I loved Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck and all that kind of stuff. The Newton Hotel where Chaplin stayed now has a Charlie Chaplin restaurant, but I don't know if they serve licorice boots and bootlaces on the menu. I'm not aware of any other memorial to Chaplin in the town. I think the restaurant's the only one. Anyway, the reason I really wanted to make this sound recording was just to say thank you to you guys for the Modern Times podcast. I first listened in February 2016 when you did your commentary on Police. And since then I've gone back and I've been listening to the podcasts in sequence, enjoying your conversations, your guest stars, and all your knowledge and insights and the rapport between the three of you. It's been an absolute joy to listen to. Maybe more importantly, you've sent me out again to rediscover Chaplin's works, and I've been reappraising my own opinions of him and enjoying some great films. So far I've been watching City Lights, Modern Times, Gold Rush, Great Dictator, and I'm starting to catch up on a lot of the shorts as well. So I just wanted to say thank you. I think you're doing a brilliant podcast, which is really worthy of Chaplin's memory and his legacy, and it's been an inspiration. You're reaching out to people across the world. We're small in number just now, but I'm sure we're growing, and I'm looking forward to hearing the next one that you do, and many, many more to come. So thanks to all of you. Bye for now.
Hi everyone, this is Sarah Tamsin, or Sarah Friendship as I'm known artistically, and I'm the one who made the Cha-Cha doll who was featured in episode 14 of the Modern Times podcast discussions. As I've mentioned several times already on my Facebook artist page, I've been planning a special surprise over the past several months, and now that I've got everything confirmed, here it is. I'm going to the Chaplin Days celebration at the Niles Film Museum in California. Yep, that's right. Ever since I first heard about this event on Nalani Tyra's Chaplin fans group page, I've been wanting to go, and I'm really excited that I'll finally be able to attend this year's event. Of course, I'll be bringing Cha-Cha with me, and I may have a few other surprises to show everyone as well, so I'm really looking forward to this. Well, that pretty much concludes my special announcement, and I'd like to thank Nigel, Anne, and Sarah for all their support, and to everyone attending Chaplin Days, I hope you're looking forward to meeting Cha-Cha, the Dolly Goodfellow, in person, and I'll see you there.
All right, and those are some great perspectives on that film. I really appreciate the fans sending in their little audio clips. That's what makes this show really enjoyable, I feel, is hearing everyone's perspectives on these films and the things about them that they enjoy. So thank you again for sending those in, and we'll do some more on the next film that we do. Well, Anne and Sarah, thank you so much for being here with me today again.
It's always a lot of fun.
Thank you.
And we'll be back soon with a commentary, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, folks, thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, bye.
Bye.